The samurai, the warrior code that shaped Japan. The enduring image of the samurai is that of a stoic, blade-wielding warrior, yet their historical role extended far beyond military service. They were a complex social class whose code of conduct, known later as Bushido, the way of the warrior, became the ethical and moral foundation of Japanese society for centuries. The term samurai originally derived from the verb saburao, meaning to serve, indicating their initial function as armed retainers of the imperial court and powerful landed clans during the Heian period, 794 to 1185 CE. As the central government's authority waned, these local warrior bands, armed with the newly developed curved katana and skilled in mounted archery, began to amass political and economic power, transforming from mere guards into the effective rulers of vast domains. Shogun. This political ascendancy culminated in the establishment of the Kamakura shogunate in 1185 under Minamoto no Yoritomo, an event that decisively shifted political power from the emperor and the Kyoto aristocracy to the warrior class, institutionalizing the samurai as the dominant political and military force in Japan for nearly 700 years. Their foundational principles centered on unquestioning loyalty, martial skill, and honor, principles that would be tested and codified through centuries of internal warfare and political transformation. The samurai, the evolution of the katana and the art of swordcraft. The katana is perhaps the single most recognizable symbol of the samurai, a curved, single-edged sword that was not merely a weapon, but a spiritual embodiment of the warrior's soul, reflecting an unparalleled mastery of metallurgy and craftsmanship known worldwide. The characteristic curve of the katana evolved significantly from its earlier, straighter predecessors, developing around the 13th century to facilitate a swift drawing and cutting motion, essential for mounted combat and the rapid deployment required in close quarters. The making of a katana was a painstaking, multi-stage process involving the repeated heating, folding, and hammering of high-carbon steel, tamahagane, to remove impurities and create the distinct layered structure that gave the blade its combination of unbreakable resilience and razor-sharp edge. The final stage involved the differential heat treatment, where a clay mixture was applied unevenly to the blade before quenching, creating the hard, sharp edge, yakiba, and the softer, shock-absorbing spine, mune, visible as the distinctive temper line or hamon. This devotion to perfection elevated swordsmithing to a sacred art, making the katana a weapon of profound lethality and unmatched artistic beauty, a testament to the samurai's obsession with quality and lethality. The samurai, Bushido, and the foundational pillars of honor. The term Bushido, the way of the warrior, was not formally codified until the relatively peaceful Edo period 1603 to 1868, as samurai shifted from battlefield soldiers to bureaucratic administrators. But the core ethical principles that defined samurai conduct were forged in the crucible of earlier civil wars. These foundational pillars included rectitude, ji, the strict adherence to justice and moral conviction; courage, yu, the willingness to act in the face of fear; and, most paramount, honor, the absolute value placed on one's reputation and self-respect, often exceeding the value of life itself. The samurai code demanded a disciplined, austere lifestyle, prioritizing public duty over personal desire, and absolute self-sacrificing loyalty, chugi, to one's feudal lord, daimyo. These virtues were instilled from childhood through rigorous training in martial arts, poetry, and calligraphy, ensuring that the samurai class saw themselves not just as fighters, but as a moral aristocracy responsible for upholding the ethical order of society, a rigid worldview that justified their political dominance and dictated their ultimate response to disgrace, seppuku. The samurai, armor, yoroi, and the balance of protection and mobility. Samurai armor, yoroi, was a masterpiece of specialized, intricate design that evolved to balance the critical needs of maximum protection with the necessary mobility required for fast-paced, sometimes mounted warfare, distinguishing it significantly from European plate armor. Early samurai wore large, boxy armor, o-yoroi, designed primarily for mounted archers. This later transitioned to the more flexible, close-fitting domaru and haramaki styles prevalent during the tumultuous Sengoku, Warring States period, suitable for infantry mass combat. The armor was constructed not from solid sheets of metal, but from hundreds of small, individually lacquered metal and leather scales, kozane, meticulously laced together with silk or leather cords, odoshi. This lacing provided both flexibility and a shock-absorbing structure, allowing the samurai a freedom of movement impossible in Western plate armor. The helmet, kabuto, was often the most expressive element, adorned with crests or mayadate that identified the wearer and provided psychological impact. This sophisticated layered defense was highly expensive and customized, visually underscoring the samurai's status as an elite, professional warrior class whose lives were literally wrapped in tradition and engineering genius. The samurai, the shogunates, and the institutionalization of warrior rule. The establishment of the shogunate marked the moment the samurai transitioned from a powerful class of regional mercenaries to the absolute institutionalized rulers of Japan, creating a dualistic governmental system that lasted until the mid-19th century. The first, the Kamakura shogunate, 1185 to 1333, centralized military governance under the title of shogun, generalissimo, who ruled the country in the name of the figurehead emperor in Kyoto. This system was continued by the Ashikaga shogunate, 1336 to 1573. The final and most powerful, the Tokugawa shogunate, 1603 to 1868, brought an unprecedented 250 years of peace and strict social order. The shogunate controlled the military, foreign policy, and the national economy, managing a complex feudal structure where the regional lords, daimyo, governed their domains but were bound by rigid and forcible rules of attendance, sankin kotai, and loyalty to the shogun. This structure solidified the samurai's position at the apex of the social hierarchy, directly below the shogun, establishing a rigid four-tiered class system: samurai, farmers, artisans, merchants, that formally enshrined the warrior class as the permanent political and administrative backbone of the nation. The samurai, mounted archery, and the early focus of combat. The earliest samurai fighting style, developed during the Heian and Kamakura periods, centered not on the sword but on mounted archery, Kyuba no Michi, the way of the bow and horse, reflecting their origins as highly mobile aristocratic shock troops. Clad in the large, heavy o-yoroi armor, the samurai used the asymmetrical, long yumi bow to deliver devastating volleys of arrows before closing for melee combat. Battles in this period often began with formal challenges between individual warriors, followed by exchanges of archery fire from horseback. Mastery of the horse and bow was considered the highest martial skill, symbolizing the distinction and superior training of the warrior class. The transition to the katana as the primary weapon occurred later, largely driven by the increasing size of armies and the shift toward massed infantry combat during the tumultuous Sengoku period. Nevertheless, the tradition of mounted archery remained an honored, ritualistic component of samurai culture, exemplified by historical events and surviving ceremonies like yabusame, archery while riding, perpetually reminding the samurai of their original, foundational military role. The samurai, Zen Buddhism, and the cultivation of inner calm.
The profound connection between the samurai and Zen Buddhism, a school of Mahayana Buddhism focused on meditation and intuition, was arguably the single most influential spiritual force shaping the warrior code, providing a philosophical foundation for their commitment to death and discipline. Introduced to Japan and gaining popularity during the Kamakura shogunate, Zen's teachings resonated deeply with the samurai because of its emphasis on direct experience, rigorous self-discipline, and austerity. Crucially, Zen's core principles helped the warrior overcome the fear of death by teaching the ultimate transience of life and the importance of living entirely in the present moment. Through dedicated meditation, zazen, the samurai sought to clear the mind of emotional attachments, achieving a state of mushin, no mind, which allowed for spontaneous, instantaneous, and highly effective action in combat, a state of ultimate focus that was prized above all else on the battlefield. The samurai, the tea ceremony, chanoyu, as spiritual training. Beyond the battlefield and the meditation cushion, the highly ritualized tea ceremony, chanoyu, served as a vital cultural practice for the samurai class, offering a structured environment for the cultivation of aesthetic appreciation, harmony, and discipline, virtues essential to the Bushido code. Developed and perfected during the Warring States period, the tea ceremony was a deliberate act of seeking simplicity and serenity amidst the chaos of constant conflict. It adhered to 4 essential principles: harmony, wa, respect, kei, purity, sei, and tranquility, jaku. For the samurai, participating in the chanoyu was not merely a social custom, it was a form of active spiritual training requiring intense focus on every minute movement and gesture, forcing the warrior to slow his mind, practice humility, and appreciate the ephemeral beauty of the present moment, a direct contemplative counterpoint to the violence and volatility of his military life.
The samurai, the ritual of seppuku and the maintenance of honor. The ultimate expression of samurai devotion to honor, meo, was the ritual act of self-disembowelment known as seppuku, or the more vulgar term, harakiri, a solemn ceremony undertaken to restore the honor of the warrior or his clan in the face of insurmountable defeat, shame, or failure. This act was not an expression of despair, but a highly disciplined, formal affirmation of spiritual conviction, chosen over surrender or dishonorable execution. The samurai would ceremoniously prepare, often writing a final death poem, jisei, before plunging a short blade, tamto, into the abdomen. To spare the warrior prolonged agony, a trusted second, kaishukukan, stood ready to decapitate him with a single, precise stroke of the katana immediately after the initial wound was inflicted. Seppuku codified the samurai belief that their life belonged entirely to their lord and their honor, establishing a terrifying moral high ground that simultaneously reinforced the rigid hierarchy of feudal Japan and provided the warrior with an existential freedom to choose the manner of his own death over a life of disgrace. The samurai, the daimyo, feudalism, and the hierarchy of loyalty. The samurai class operated within a strict feudal framework dominated by the regional warlords known as daimyo, whose economic power and military strength were derived entirely from their land holdings and their absolute command over their samurai retainers. The relationship between the daimyo and the individual samurai was a reciprocal bond founded on unwavering loyalty, chuji, and patronage. The daimyo provided his samurai with land, stipends, and status, while the samurai in return pledged their lives and service. This system created a highly decentralized political landscape, especially during the war-stating period, where hundreds of competing daimyo fought for territorial dominance,
effectively turning the samurai into the professional military administrative elite essential for governing and defending these fractured domains. This rigid hierarchy ensured that a samurai's personal honor and worth were inextricably linked to the fortunes and reputation of his liege lord, making the failure of one the shame of the other. The samurai, the role of the ronin, and the loss of status. The figure of the ronin, literally wave man, represents a critical, often tragic element of samurai society. A masterless samurai who had lost his lord, either through the lord's death, fall from power, or the ronin's own failure or dismissal. While the ideal of Bushido demanded unwavering loyalty, the political turmoil of the war-stating period and the subsequent imposition of peace by the Tokugawa shogunate created large numbers of ronin. The shogunate, fearing their collective military skill and potential for rebellion, enacted strict controls that often denied them employment in administrative roles. Forced to survive by their wits and their swords, the ronin often became mercenaries, bodyguards, or, in some cases, bandits, living outside the rigid social structure of the Tokugawa era. Their existence underscored the fragility of the samurai's social contract. Without a master to serve, the samurai lost his defined purpose, stipend, and status, becoming a symbol of the tension between the warrior's personal honor and the cold, unyielding reality of the feudal bureaucracy. The samurai: clothing, appearance, and social distinction. Samurai attire and appearance were meticulously managed, serving as an immediate visual marker of social rank, wealth, and the distinction of the warrior class from the common people. Off the battlefield, the samurai wore formal attire consisting of a kimono covered by the hakama, a pleated skirt-like garment, and the hayori, a hip-length jacket. During the Tokugawa period, the formal kamishimo, characterized by its distinctively large, stiff-shouldered top piece and matching hakama, became required for public appearances, reinforcing the class's bureaucratic and aristocratic status. Crucially, the right to wear the two swords, the daisho, the long katana, and the short wakizashi, was the exclusive privilege of the samurai class from the late 16th century onward, making the daisho the definitive symbol of the warrior's legal superiority. The samurai also maintained a distinct hairstyle, the chanmage, where the top of the head was shaved and the remaining hair was gathered into a topknot, a practical custom that helped secure the helmet in battle and signified their commitment to the warrior path.
The samurai, the Kamakura period, and the rise of the warrior elite. The Kamakura period, 1185 to 1333 CE, represents the decisive era in which the samurai class wrested actual political control from the imperial court and cemented their legal and military dominance over Japan, establishing the structures that would define subsequent Japanese feudalism. Following the defeat of the Taira clan by the Minamoto in the Genpei War, 1180 to 1185, Minamoto no Yoritomo established his military government, Bakufu, in Kamakura, far from the traditional imperial center in Kyoto, strategically distancing the warrior class from the softening influence of the court aristocracy. He assumed the title of Shogun in 1192 and, importantly, implemented two key administrative structures, the Jito, military land stewards, and the Shugo, military governors. These officials were samurai retainers placed across the country to manage and police the domains, effectively shifting the administrative control of Japan from the civil bureaucracy to the hands of Yoritomo's loyal warriors, securing the samurai's position as the undisputed landholding and political elite. The samurai, the long bow, and the art of kyujutsu. While the sword is iconic, the long bow, yumi, was, for centuries, the most strategically important weapon of the samurai, and the discipline of kyujutsu, the art of archery, was considered the foundation of martial prowess until the late medieval period. The Japanese bow was uniquely asymmetrical and unusually long, often over 2 meters, requiring immense strength and specialized technique to manage, particularly from horseback. This massive size was crucial for maximizing the range and power needed to pierce the thick, layered armor of opposing samurai. Archery training was viewed as an essential path to discipline, demanding a state of calm concentration and physical control that mirrored the mental preparation required in Zen meditation. The samurai's historical devotion to the bow underscores a key distinction from their later image. They were originally formidable mounted archers who used the sword primarily as a last resort sidearm, a role that only fundamentally shifted with the introduction of firearms and the rise of mass infantry formations. The samurai, the Edo peace, and the bureaucratic samurai. The advent of the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, brought about by the consolidation of power under the Tokugawa shogunate, ushered in an era of unprecedented peace and stability, profoundly changing the day-to-day role and function of the samurai class. With large-scale warfare virtually eliminated, the samurai ceased to be frontline warriors and instead transformed into a hereditary administrative and bureaucratic elite. They retained their privileged status and stipends, but their duties shifted to tax collection, public works administration, law enforcement, and maintaining the social order. This transition often led to an existential crisis for the warrior class, as their martial skills became less relevant than their literary and organizational abilities. This long period of peace saw the formal codification of Bushido by philosophers, an attempt to provide ethical and spiritual justification for the continued dominance of a class whose primary function was now administrative rather than military. The samurai, the hagakure, and the philosophy of immediate death. One of the most profound and often misunderstood texts that shaped the ideal samurai mindset, particularly during the Edo period, is the Hagakure, In the Shadow of Leaves, a spiritual and philosophical guide compiled by Yamamoto Tsunetomo in the early 18th century. Though a private work, initially discouraged by the shogunate for its extremism, the Hagakure later became famous for its stark, central assertion, "The way of the warrior is death." This was not an advocacy for reckless behavior, but a call for the samurai to live every moment with the absolute certainty of imminent death, thereby freeing the mind from hesitation and fear, allowing for perfect, unburdened action in service of one's lord. The text stressed the virtues of martial excellence, unwavering loyalty, and the pursuit of honor in all daily tasks, regardless of their mundane nature. The Hagakure's influence grew significantly in the 20th century, cementing its reputation as the ultimate, uncompromising statement on samurai existential philosophy, emphasizing an ascetic focus on the present moment and the transcendence of mortal fear through spiritual commitment.
The samurai and the introduction of firearms, teppu, the revolution of warfare. The arrival of firearms, teppu, in Japan in 1543, introduced by Portuguese traders shipwrecked on Tanegashima Island, triggered a rapid and profound revolution in samurai warfare, fundamentally challenging the dominance of the bow and the sword. Within decades, leading daimyo like Oda Nobunaga embraced this new technology, establishing factories to mass-produce the arquebus and integrating large regiments of matchlock-wielding infantry, the ashigaru, into their armies. The tactical shift was immediate and decisive, culminating in the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, where Nobunaga's disciplined ranks of riflemen decimated the charging cavalry forces of the Takeda clan. The introduction of the firearm democratized warfare, reducing the strategic advantage of the highly trained, aristocratic samurai archer swordsman and paving the way for the mass infantry tactics and large-scale sieges that defined the final unification of Japan under the shogunate. The samurai, the dual swords, the daisho, and the symbol of status. The carrying of the daisho, literally large and small, the pair of the long katana and the shorter wakizashi, where the dagger tanto, was the exclusive defining privilege and symbol of the samurai class in the Edo period, marking their elevated legal status in the rigid four-tiered social system. The katana was the primary weapon used in open combat, while the wakizashi served multiple roles: a sidearm for close-quarters fighting, a defense weapon when the katana was unavailable, and critically, the blade used to perform seppuku. The practice of wearing the two swords became formalized by decree under the shogunate in the late 16th century, legally separating the warrior class from commoners, farmers, artisans, merchants, who were only permitted to carry specific, less lethal weapons. Thus, the daisho was not merely an arsenal. It was a portable declaration of aristocracy and judicial authority, signifying the samurai's right to enforce the law and their willingness to live and die by the sword. The samurai, the role of women, and the ana bugeisha. While historical focus often centers on the male samurai, women of the samurai class, known as ana bugeisha, woman warrior, played significant, though often historically understated roles in defense, administration, and even battlefield command. Daughters of samurai received rigorous training in martial arts, including the use of the naginata, a pole weapon with a curved blade, which was deemed especially suitable for female warriors as it maximized reach and leverage. The primary duty of the ana bugeisha was the defense of the household and family honor in times of war, particularly when the men were away on campaign. Historical figures like Tomei Gozen and Hojo Masako demonstrate that some women attained extraordinary levels of military and political power. Although their prominence declined during the peaceful patriarchal Edo period, the tradition of the ana bugeisha underscores that the warrior spirit and the defense of honor were not exclusively male virtues within the samurai culture, even if their public military visibility was often constrained by societal norms. The samurai, economic life, and the rice stipend system. The economic foundation of the samurai class, particularly after the political consolidation under the Tokugawa shogunate, shifted from direct land ownership to a fixed stipend system paid in rice, koku, tremendously changing their relationship with the land and the national economy. Early samurai were warrior landowners, directly managing their domains. However, under the shogunate, samurai were generally mandated to reside in castle towns, becoming salaried urban administrators. Their income was assessed and delivered annually in koku, a unit of rice sufficient to feed one person for 1 year. This system ensured the daimyo and the shogun maintained control over the productive farmlands and the tax base, while the samurai were financially dependent on their lord, ensuring unwavering loyalty. This dependence, however, created economic instability, as fluctuations in rice harvests and market prices often led to debt for the non-productive administrative samurai, contributing to the financial strains that eventually hastened the collapse of the entire feudal system in the 19th century. The samurai, the aesthetics of imperfection, and wabi-sabi. The samurai's appreciation for Zen aesthetics led to the adoption of principles like wabi-sabi, a profound worldview centered on the acceptance and celebration of imperfection, transience, and asymmetry, a direct philosophical counterpoint to the pursuit of Western classical perfection. Wabi referred to the spiritual aspects of living in quiet solitude, humility, and simplicity, while Sabi referred to the material beauty found in age, wear, and patina. This aesthetic was reflected in many aspects of samurai life, from the design of their austere tea rooms to the preference for simple, rough-hewn ceramics over polished and symmetrical wares. For the warrior, embracing wabi-sabi meant acknowledging the fleeting nature of life and battle, finding beauty and truth in the brokenness of things, and appreciating the deep patina of history on a sword blade or a piece of armor. This philosophy provided a spiritual anchor, allowing the warrior to remain calm amid the chaos of war by accepting that all things, including life and victory, are fundamentally temporary and incomplete.
The samurai, poetry, and the expression of mortality. Despite their reputation for violence, the samurai class held a deep and revered tradition of poetry, viewing its composition as an essential practice for the cultivation of the inner self, emotional discipline, and intellectual refinement. The most important poetic form was the waka, or tanka, a short 5-line poem, 5-7-5-7-7 syllable structure, focusing often on nature, love, and, crucially, mortality and war. Before battle, it was common practice for high-ranking samurai to compose a jisei, a death poem, a final expression of their worldview, their readiness to die, and their spiritual detachment from the earthly realm. This tradition served as a public demonstration of the samurai's composure and cultured mind, confirming that their acceptance of death was not barbaric but philosophical. The creation of such poetry was integral to Bushido, showing that true martial excellence required not only skill with the blade, but also the capacity for aesthetic contemplation and the elegant articulation of their brief existence. The samurai, the Meiji Restoration, and the abolition of the class. The final and most dramatic chapter of the samurai narrative was their abolition as a privileged class during the Meiji Restoration, 1868, a revolutionary period that saw the final overthrow of the Tokugawa shogunate and the rapid modernization of Japan. Faced with overwhelming Western military technology and influence, the new Meiji government sought to centralize power and create a modern, unified nation-state, a goal incompatible with the existence of a semi-autonomous feudal warrior class. Key steps included the abolition of the domains, han, the commutation of samurai stipends into interest-bearing government bonds, and the prohibition of wearing the daisho in public, the Haitore Edict of 1876. These reforms stripped the samurai of their political function, economic foundation, and defining social symbol. While a few conservative samurai attempted armed resistance, notably the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Saigo Takamori, these efforts were brutally crushed by the new National Conscript Army, definitively marking the end of the samurai as a legal and military entity, though their cultural influence persisted. The samurai, the Satsuma Rebellion, and the final stand. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 represents the last, desperate military attempt by the traditional samurai to resist the crushing modernization reforms of the Meiji government and restore their cherished political and social status. Led by Saigo Takamori, a powerful figure who had ironically helped orchestrate the Meiji Restoration but later opposed its radical anti-samurai policies, the rebellion saw an army of highly trained, dedicated samurai warriors clash with the new, conscript-based national army equipped with modern Western artillery and rifles.
The ensuing conflict, particularly the decisive siege of Shiroyama, highlighted the tragic mismatch between the samurai's individual prowess and the overwhelming industrial might of the modern state. The defeat and eventual ritual suicide or seppuku of Saigo did more than end the rebellion. It provided a powerful, romantic, and tragic symbolic conclusion to the samurai age, confirming that the dominance of honor, loyalty, and the sword had finally yielded to the practical necessity of military and industrial modernity. The samurai, castles, shiro, and the centers of feudal power. The Japanese castle, shiro, was the physical and political manifestation of samurai dominance, serving not just as a defensive stronghold in times of war, but as the administrative and economic center of the daimyo's domain throughout the feudal era. Unlike European castles built primarily for passive defense, Japanese castles evolved to be complex, multi-layered defensive systems, culminating in the massive stone-based structures of the Sengoku and Edo periods, example, Himeji or Osaka Castle. These castles were characterized by their towering tenshu, intricate stone walls, and confusing spiraling approach paths designed to maximize the defender's advantage. Crucially, during the peaceful Edo period, the castle town or jokamachi that grew up around the castle became the required residence for the samurai class, transforming the castle complex into the urban heart of the entire feudal system, housing the daimyo, his samurai administrators, and the commercial infrastructure necessary to govern the region. The samurai, martial arts, and the focus on unarmed combat, jujutsu. While the sword and bow were the primary battlefield tools, the samurai were also masters of unarmed combat techniques, jujutsu, a crucial set of skills developed for situations where weapons were lost or impractical, particularly in close quarters fighting or surprise attacks. Jujutsu, later formalized into various modern disciplines like judo and aikijutsu, focused on using an opponent's momentum and strength against them, employing techniques like joint locks, throws, strikes, and chokes to disable a fully armored adversary. The emphasis on leverage and joint manipulation was essential because of the difficulty of cutting through samurai armor. The training in jujutsu, often referred to generically as taijutsu, instilled a deep understanding of human anatomy and balance, ensuring that the warrior possessed a complete and adaptable skill set. This proficiency in both armed and unarmed combat underscored the samurai's identity as a total warrior, prepared to prevail regardless of the tactical circumstances or the availability of conventional weaponry.
The samurai, Shintoism, and the veneration of ancestors. While Zen Buddhism profoundly influenced the samurai's spiritual discipline, Shintoism, Japan's indigenous religious tradition centered on the worship of kami, divine spirits or deities often linked to natural forces and ancestors, remained deeply woven into the samurai's worldview, particularly regarding lineage and local identity. The samurai, as aristocratic landholders, maintained a strong connection to their ancestral lands and their clan deities, worshiping at local shrines to ensure good harvests, protection, and success in battle. The veneration of ancestors was paramount, as the spirits of past warriors were believed to watch over and sometimes aid their descendants. Shinto provided a framework for understanding the sacred nature of the land and the legitimacy of the clan's dominion over it. This spiritual duality, using Zen for mental clarity and Shinto for communal identity and blessing, allowed the samurai to reconcile their austere military philosophy with the rooted, nature-centric religious beliefs of the broader Japanese populace, reinforcing their role as the guardians of the physical and spiritual continuity of their domain. The samurai, economic decline, and the rise of the merchant class. The long peace of the Edo period, while beneficial for the nation, created a profound economic crisis for the samurai class, ultimately contributing to the collapse of the shogunate itself. The fixed rice stipend system, designed in an agrarian economy, failed to account for the rapid urbanization and the emergence of a money-based market economy. While the samurai were forbidden by their code to engage in commerce, a job reserved for the lowest class, the merchants saw their wealth and influence skyrocket. Samurai, receiving their income in rice but needing coin for urban expenses, frequently had to sell their stipends at unfavorable rates, leading to massive indebtedness to the very merchant class they legally despised. This economic inversion, where the legally low-status merchants held the true financial power and the high-status samurai were often impoverished and debt-ridden, fueled social tension and resentment, creating an intellectual crisis of legitimacy that spurred some samurai to seek radical political change and modernization. The samurai, the theater of battle and the practice of head-taking. Warfare during the samurai period, particularly up to the Sengoku era, often possessed a pronounced theatrical and ritualistic element that underscored the importance of individual honor and recognition over mass, anonymous slaughter. The battlefield was a stage where samurai sought to perform memorable deeds, often announcing their name, lineage, and exploits before engaging in single combat. The ultimate proof of a samurai's prowess and the central objective after a victory was the ritualized head-taking, kubigari, where the heads of slain enemy samurai were taken, meticulously cleaned, and presented to the commander for formal identification and tallying. These grisly trophies were essential for proving rank, validating kills, and receiving rewards, making the practice a critical administrative requirement rather than mere savagery. This focus on individual recognition, combined with the often extravagant armor and banners, sashimono, transformed the chaos of battle into a system where personal reputation and documented success were paramount to a warrior's advancement and honor. The samurai, calligraphy, and the weapon of the brush. The rigorous practice of calligraphy, shodo, was considered an indispensable skill for the samurai, embodying the crucial Bushido ideal that the warrior must be proficient in both the martial arts, bu, and the literary arts, bun. For the samurai, the demanding art of wielding the brush required the same levels of concentration, discipline, fluid movement, and instantaneous precision as wielding the sword. A single poorly executed stroke could not be corrected, forcing the practitioner to act with complete focus and commitment, mirroring the decisive action required in battle. Mastery of calligraphy, alongside poetry and the tea ceremony, provided the samurai with a means of self-cultivation and aesthetic expression, demonstrating to society that they were not brute soldiers, but a refined, educated aristocracy whose political authority was justified by their moral and intellectual superiority. Shodo was therefore not merely a hobby, but a form of psychological and spiritual training essential to the balanced warrior ideal.
The samurai, the ritual of seppuku and the maintenance of honor. The ultimate expression of samurai devotion to honor, meo, was the ritual act of self-disembowelment known as seppuku, or the more vulgar term harakiri, a solemn ceremony undertaken to restore the honor of the warrior or his clan in the face of insurmountable defeat, shame, or failure. This act was not an expression of despair, but a highly disciplined, formal affirmation of spiritual conviction, chosen over surrender or dishonorable execution. The samurai would ceremoniously prepare, often writing a final death poem, jisei, before plunging a short blade, tamto, into the abdomen. To spare the warrior prolonged agony, a trusted second, kaishukukan, stood ready to decapitate him with a single, precise stroke of the katana immediately after the initial wound was inflicted. Seppuku codified the samurai belief that their life belonged entirely to their lord and their honor,
establishing a terrifying moral high ground that simultaneously reinforced the rigid hierarchy of feudal Japan and provided the warrior with an existential freedom to choose the manner of his own death over a life of disgrace. The samurai, the daimyo, feudalism, and the hierarchy of loyalty. The samurai class operated within a strict feudal framework dominated by the regional warlords known as daimyo, whose economic power and military strength were derived entirely from their land holdings and their absolute command over their samurai retainers. The relationship between the daimyo and the individual samurai was a reciprocal bond founded on unwavering loyalty, chuji, and patronage. The daimyo provided his samurai with land, stipends, and status, while the samurai in return pledged their lives and service. This system created a highly decentralized political landscape, especially during the war-stating period, where hundreds of competing daimyo fought for territorial dominance, effectively turning the samurai into the professional military administrative elite essential for governing and defending these fractured domains. This rigid hierarchy ensured that a samurai's personal honor and worth were inextricably linked to the fortunes and reputation of his liege lord, making the failure of one the shame of the other. The samurai, the role of the ronin, and the loss of status. The figure of the ronin, literally wave man, represents a critical, often tragic element of samurai society. A masterless samurai who had lost his lord, either through the lord's death, fall from power, or the ronin's own failure or dismissal. While the ideal of Bushido demanded unwavering loyalty, the political turmoil of the war-stating period and the subsequent imposition of peace by the Tokugawa shogunate created large numbers of ronin. The shogunate, fearing their collective military skill and potential for rebellion, enacted strict controls that often denied them employment in administrative roles. Forced to survive by their wits and their swords, the ronin often became mercenaries, bodyguards, or, in some cases, bandits, living outside the rigid social structure of the Tokugawa era. Their existence underscored the fragility of the samurai's social contract. Without a master to serve, the samurai lost his defined purpose, stipend, and status, becoming a symbol of the tension between the warrior's personal honor and the cold, unyielding reality of the feudal bureaucracy. The samurai, clothing, appearance, and social distinction. Samurai attire and appearance were meticulously managed, serving as an immediate visual marker of social rank, wealth, and the distinction of the warrior class from the common people. Off the battlefield, the samurai wore formal attire consisting of a kimono covered by the hakama, a pleated skirt-like garment, and the hayori, a hip-length jacket. During the Tokugawa period, the formal kamishimo, characterized by its distinctively large, stiff-shouldered top piece and matching hakama, became required for public appearances, reinforcing the class's bureaucratic and aristocratic status. Crucially, the right to wear the two swords, the daisho, the long katana, and the short wakizashi, was the exclusive privilege of the samurai class from the late 16th century onward, making the daisho the definitive symbol of the warrior's legal superiority. The samurai also maintained a distinct hairstyle, the chanmage, where the top of the head was shaved and the remaining hair was gathered into a topknot, a practical custom that helped secure the helmet in battle and signified their commitment to the warrior path.
The samurai, the naginata, and the battlefield role of the polearm. The naginata, a long pole weapon with a curved blade, while often associated with the onabugesha, female warriors, for its reach advantage, was historically a formidable and essential infantry weapon used extensively by male samurai and foot soldiers in the early feudal period, Kamakura and Muromachi. Its long reach allowed a soldier to engage a mounted samurai, effectively countering the cavalry's height and momentum. The naginata's wide, sweeping arc made it devastating in crowd combat and against charging formations. As warfare evolved towards massed ranks of yari, straight spears, and firearms in the Sengoku period, the naginata's prominence in male combat declined due to the superior organization and defensive strength of the yari formation. However, its continued use in the Onabugesha's defense of the home kept the weapon a symbol of noble female martial training and household honor. This evolution highlights how samurai military tactics were constantly adapted based on the changing technology and scale of the battlefield, even if popular symbolism favored the sword. The samurai, naval warfare, and the atakebore warships. While the samurai are primarily known for land combat, their power was also projected through naval warfare, which became critically important during periods of internal conflict and foreign expeditions, such as Toyotomi Hideyoshi's invasions of Korea. Japanese naval technology centered on the atakebune, literally the Great Attack Boat, massive, floating wooden fortresses designed less for speed and more for carrying large numbers of samurai and ashigaru, foot soldiers, into boarding action. These imposing ships were often heavily armored with planks, sometimes referred to as iron ships, though true metal sheathing was limited. The primary goal of samurai naval combat was not to sink the enemy fleet with cannons, which were scarce, but to grapple and board the opponent's ship, transforming the sea battle into a ship-to-ship samurai melee. The mastery of naval logistics and combat was essential for controlling coastal domains and transporting armies, demonstrating that the scope of the samurai's military influence included the strategic control of Japan's internal waterways and surrounding seas. The samurai, the ashigaru, and the backbone of the army. The success of the major daimyo during the late medieval period relied overwhelmingly not on the individual skill of the high-ranking samurai, but on the disciplined, massed forces of the ashigaru, literally light feet, the professional foot soldiers who served as the indispensable backbone of every samurai army. Initially irregular levies, the ashigaru evolved into dedicated, highly organized infantry units during the Sengoku period, equipped with the increasingly common yari, straight spear, and teppo, arquebus. They lacked the aristocratic status of the samurai, but their sheer numbers and discipline, particularly in the mass application of firearms, were the decisive factor in the campaigns of unification. The ashigaru were commanded by lower-ranking samurai, and their performance was crucial. Without their ability to form large, cohesive formations, the samurai's authority and ability to wage large-scale war would have been impossible. Their rise underscored the transition of Japanese warfare from aristocratic duels to modern, logistical mass conflict, which ultimately secured the peace of the Tokugawa shogunate.
The samurai, tattooing, and the spiritual significance of skin art. While often associated with the criminal class, yakuza, in later Japanese history, the practice of tattooing, irezumi, held a different, complex, and sometimes highly spiritual significance during the samurai period, particularly among low-ranking warriors and laborers. For the samurai, tattoos could serve as badges of devotion, courage, or religious belief, depicting protective deities like Fudo Myo-o, fierce mythical creatures, dragons, phoenixes, or scenes of heroic Buddhist lore. Tattoos provided an invisible form of armor, a spiritual defense against harm, and a permanent, visible commitment to a philosophy or a chosen path. However, the practice remained controversial among the highest-ranking samurai aristocracy, who often preferred the subtle markings of status in clothing and calligraphy. Nevertheless, the bold, elaborate nature of irezumi among the lower warrior and artisan classes demonstrated a deeply rooted Japanese tradition of using the body as a canvas for existential commitment,
a practice that blended aesthetic beauty with a defiant, eternal declaration of identity. The samurai, the ninja, and the art of covert warfare. The relationship between the aristocratic samurai and the ninja or shinobi, masters of espionage, sabotage, and unconventional warfare, was one of necessity, mutual utility, and distinct social separation. While the samurai adhered to the visible code of Bushido and preferred open battle, the daimyo often covertly employed ninja clans to execute tasks deemed beneath the samurai's honor, such as infiltration, assassination, and intelligence gathering. The ninja originated from regions like Iga and Koka, where they developed specialized practical fighting styles and knowledge of camouflage, poisons, and survival skills that contrasted sharply with the samurai's formal martial arts. The samurai provided the political and military command, while the ninja provided the crucial element of deniable, secretive warfare. This use of covert specialists demonstrated the pragmatic reality of the feudal wars. Despite the lofty ideals of Bushido, survival and victory often required the strategic deployment of dishonorable yet highly effective shadow warriors operating outside the established code. The samurai, food, diet, and the austerity of the warrior. The samurai diet and culinary culture reflected the core tenets of Bushido, emphasizing austerity, discipline, and practicality over indulgence, contrasting sharply with the elaborate cuisine of the imperial court aristocracy. The staples of the samurai diet were rice, fish, vegetables, and minimal meat, primarily wild game like boar or venison, aligning with the general Buddhist reluctance to consume four-legged animals. Meals were typically simple, emphasizing the natural flavor and freshness of ingredients rather than heavy seasoning. The emphasis on zen and austerity encouraged a frugal approach to food consumption, ensuring the warrior maintained a light, disciplined physique suitable for martial activity. This dietary rigor was not just about health, it was a moral practice, reinforcing the samurai's commitment to self-control and the rejection of effeminate luxury, thereby distinguishing their disciplined warrior status from the perceived decadence of the earlier soft Kyoto elite. The samurai, the gun kimono, war tales, and heroic narrative. The gun kimono, war tales, constitute a vital literary genre of the samurai period, serving as dramatic, often semi-historical accounts that codified the ideals of the warrior class and established a heroic narrative for Japanese history. Texts like Heikei Monogatari, Tale of the Heikei, and Tai-Heiki, Record of the Great Peace, described the epic conflicts between the great warrior clans, Minamoto and Taira, emphasizing themes of fate, Buddhism's concept of impermanence, Mujo, and the tragic yet glorious fall of powerful heroes. These tales were often recited by itinerant monks and storytellers, acting as a crucial medium for propagating the values of Bushido, unwavering loyalty, the acceptance of death, and the pursuit of everlasting fame, Meio. While these tales often embellished historical fact for dramatic effect, they were instrumental in shaping the collective memory of the samurai and provided the ethical templates against which real warriors measured their own conduct and sacrifice.
The samurai, the wakizashi, and the intimate weapon. The wakizashi, the short sword paired with the long katana to form the daisho, played a unique and intimate role in the samurai's arsenal, serving as the weapon most frequently carried indoors, the sidearm for close-quarters fighting, and the ultimate tool of personal honor. Because samurai were typically required to surrender their katana upon entering a lord's castle or private residence, the wakizashi remained at their side,
functioning as the personal defense weapon in restricted spaces. It was also the blade of choice for the ritual of seppuku, ritual suicide, granting the warrior the final, existential choice to restore his honor. Unlike the katana, which was often an expression of the clan's prestige, the wakizashi was more personal, often highly customized to the individual samurai's preference. This short weapon symbolized the warrior's unwavering readiness for danger and commitment to honor in all circumstances, even within the supposed safety of peacetime society. The samurai, siege warfare, and the importance of fortification. While the samurai preferred pitched battles and swift, decisive action, the reality of the Sengoku period, warring states, often required complex and prolonged siege warfare, elevating the importance of fortification, engineering, and logistics. Unlike the slow-moving sieges of medieval Europe, samurai sieges often involved rapid construction of temporary fortifications, earthworks, and ingenious tactics like water diversion, flooding the castle, or undermining walls using large digging parties. The key objective was often not to breach the massive stone walls directly, but to cut off the castle's supply lines, forcing the defending daimyo to surrender due to starvation or lack of water. This shift toward lengthy sieges necessitated a change in the samurai's skills, emphasizing patience, engineering supervision, and the ability to command large numbers of non-samurai laborers, ashigaru, and conscripts, proving that logistical and engineering prowess were as vital to feudal victory as individual martial skill. The samurai, the art of woodblock prints, ukiyo-e, and heroic depiction. During the peaceful Edo period, when the samurai's martial role waned, their heroic ideal was preserved and popularized through the vibrant, accessible medium of woodblock prints, ukiyo-e, particularly those depicting historical and legendary warrior deeds. Masters like Utagawa Kuniyoshi specialized in musha-e, warrior pictures, visually immortalizing famous samurai, ronin, and scenes from the war tales, gunkimono, like the 47 Ronin incident. These prints were mass-produced and widely consumed by the burgeoning merchant class, playing a crucial role in mythologizing the Bushido ideal, creating a romanticized vision of the samurai that emphasized their courage, dramatic confrontations, and superhuman feats. The ukiyo-e prints served as a cultural bridge, ensuring that the aesthetic and moral values of the samurai, even as their real-world political power declined, were disseminated, celebrated, and ingrained into the collective popular imagination of Japan, influencing cultural perceptions for centuries.
The samurai mythology, folklore, and the influence of dragons. The samurai spiritual and artistic landscape was heavily influenced by Japanese mythology and folklore, which often incorporated powerful, symbolic creatures, most notably the dragon, Ryu, and the tiger. The dragon, imported heavily through Buddhist and Chinese influence, was universally revered as a deity associated with water, power, wisdom, and immense strength, often seen as a protective force. Samurai armor, yoroi, helmet crests, and sword fittings, suba, were frequently decorated with dragon motifs, symbolizing the warrior's desire to embody those traits and attract the dragon's powerful protection in battle. The frequent pairing of the dragon, symbolizing the sky and spiritual power, with the tiger, symbolizing the land and fierce physical strength, represented a complete, balanced authority. This reliance on mythological symbolism demonstrates the samurai's integration of the aesthetic and the divine into their daily lives, believing that the spiritual power of these legendary creatures could be channeled to enhance their own martial effectiveness and personal protection. The samurai, the development of kendo and post-samurai training. Following the formal abolition of the samurai class in 1876, their martial legacy was largely preserved and transformed through the development of modern martial arts, particularly kendo, the way of the sword.
Kendo evolved directly from the practical sword-fighting techniques practiced by the samurai, but it was formalized into a sport and an ethical discipline based on bamboo swords, shinai, and protective armor, bogu. The focus shifted from lethal technique to the cultivation of spirit, character, and etiquette, retaining the core philosophical principles of Bushido, even as its military function vanished. This transformation ensured that the spiritual and ethical teachings of the samurai, discipline, respect, focus, and self-control, remained a central part of Japanese education and cultural identity well into the 20th and 21st centuries. Kendo became the chief means by which the modern state could honor the warrior past while simultaneously channeling its competitive energy into a non-military, controlled discipline. The samurai, language, name structure, and the mark of status. The samurai's language, name structure, and etiquette were deeply complex, serving as immediate, pervasive markers of social rank, authority, and status within the rigid feudal hierarchy. Samurai used specialized forms of speech, keigo or honorifics, when addressing their superiors, inferiors, and peers, reinforcing the structure of the daimyo-samurai relationship. Their name structure was also highly formalized. A samurai typically had a family name, myoji, and a given name, nanori, and often acquired an official title or nickname. Furthermore, they alone possessed the right to use a surname in an era when most commoners were nameless. The changing of names upon promotion or retirement was a formal, symbolic act, reflecting a change in status or allegiance. This precision in nomenclature and speech was not merely cultural fluff, it was an essential tool for bureaucratic governance and social control, ensuring that every samurai knew his exact place in the chain of command and acted with the appropriate level of deference or authority. The samurai, military banners, and the psychological impact of identity. The use of highly personalized and distinctive military banners, sashimono and umaji-rushi, was a critical element of samurai warfare, serving not only for tactical command and control, but also for generating psychological impact and establishing an unbreakable link between the warrior, his lord, and his daimyo's reputation. The sashimono was a small banner affixed to the back of the samurai's armor, bearing the clan crest, mon, or the lord's symbol, making the individual warrior instantly identifiable even in the chaotic melee of battle. Larger banners, the umaji-rushi, horse banners, served as massive, elaborate standards carried near the general, marking the exact location of the commander on the field. This emphasis on visual identification ensured that both valorous deeds and acts of cowardice were immediately visible, reinforcing the honor-driven culture of Bushido. By turning the battlefield into a highly visible arena of personal conduct, the banners acted as a powerful psychological tool, forcing the samurai to fight with courage to protect the highly public display of his own and his lord's identity.
The samurai, the tameshigiri, and the test of the blade. The relentless pursuit of quality in the katana led to the practice of tameshigiri, literally test cutting, a highly specialized and brutal ritual involving the testing of a newly forged blade's sharpness and durability on actual materials, which often included straw mats, tatami, metal rods, or, historically, the bodies of executed criminals. The goal was to prove the blade's ability to perform specific cuts, such as diagonal or straight slicing, and to determine the cutting grade of the master craftsman. The test results were often inscribed on the tang of the sword, nakago, providing a permanent documented testament to its lethality. While the tameshigiri demonstrated the samurai's commitment to superior weaponry, it also underscored the profound practical relationship between the warrior and his tool. The sword was not a mere ornament, but a piece of precision engineering whose proven effectiveness was a matter of life and death. This rigorous testing ensured that only the finest blades were entrusted to the warrior, upholding the samurai tradition that the sword was the sacred embodiment of the warrior's spirit. The samurai, the no theater, and the aesthetic of austerity.
The No theater, a classical form of Japanese musical drama characterized by its minimalist staging, solemn masks, and slow, highly formalized movements, was a cherished art form among the samurai elite, particularly during the Muromachi and Edo periods. No plays often dealt with themes directly relevant to the warrior's existence: spiritual redemption, the transience of glory, mujo, and the consequences of passionate attachment, lessons deeply rooted in Zen, Buddhist, and Shinto philosophies. The aesthetic of austerity, yugen, and deep, subtle beauty embodied in No resonated with the samurai's own commitment to discipline and inner calm. Patronage of No allowed the samurai to demonstrate their cultural refinement and provided a contemplative counterbalance to their violent profession. By engaging with this slow, deeply symbolic art, the warrior reaffirmed the Bunbu Ryodo ideal, proving that intellectual and artistic depth was essential to the moral stature of the ruling military class. The samurai, the code of giri, and the web of obligation. The samurai's life was dictated not just by Bushido's internal principles of honor and courage, but by an external, complex, and pervasive web of social obligation, known as giri, duty, or obligation. Giri represented the societal pressure to maintain one's reputation and fulfill all expectations placed upon the warrior by his lord, his family, and his community, often requiring the subordination of personal desires or feelings to the required public action. There were various forms of giri, including giri toward one's lord, chuji, which mandated unwavering loyalty, and giri towards one's parents and family. The burden of giri was immense. Failure to meet one's obligation could bring profound shame not only upon the individual, but on the entire clan. This tension between the samurai's private emotions, ninjon, and his public duty, giri, was the constant source of dramatic conflict in literature and the basis for many heroic and tragic decisions, cementing giri as the social cement that held the rigid, hierarchical feudal system together. The Samurai, Miyamoto Musashi, and the Way of Two Swords. Miyamoto Musashi, 1584 to 1645, stands as one of the most legendary and influential figures in samurai history, transcending the role of mere warrior to become a philosopher, artist, and masterless swordsman, ronin, whose teachings continue to define martial strategy. Musashi's renown was built upon his supported 60 duels, which he is said to have fought and won without a single defeat, most famously defeating the renowned swordsman Sasaki Kojiro. He later systematized his unique fighting style, known as Nito Ichiryu, two heavens as one school, which involved simultaneously wielding the long katana and the short wakizashi, an unconventional method that capitalized on his opponent's surprise and limited reach. Musashi codified his philosophical and strategic wisdom in Gorino Sho, the Book of Five Rings, written shortly before his death. This text delves into the mental, physical, and tactical elements of strategy, arguing that the principles of sword fighting are applicable to all aspects of life, establishing Musashi as the ultimate theoretical and practical master of the martial arts.
The samurai, the kabuki theater, and popular culture. While no theater catered to the austere tastes of the elite samurai class, kabuki theater, a dynamic, colorful, and popular art form that emerged during the Edo period, played a critical role in interpreting, criticizing, and disseminating the samurai's heroic legends to the wider merchant and urban populations. Kabuki, known for its stylized makeup, extravagant costumes, and dramatic action, frequently staged plays based on historical events, particularly the tragedies and heroic exploits found in the Gunkimono and the Ronin tales, e.g., the Chushin Gura, the 47 Ronin. These performances served as a cultural outlet where the commoners could engage with the high ideals and rigid codes of the samurai, often presenting the conflicts between giri, duty,
and ninjo, human feeling, in heightened, relatable terms. Although the shogunate often viewed kabuki with suspicion and attempted to regulate its content, its popularity ensured that the romanticized, dramatic version of the samurai code remained a central, powerful force in Japanese popular culture, far outlasting the class itself. The samurai, the 47 ronin, and the ultimate act of loyalty. The historical incident of the 47 Ronin, or Akko incident, which occurred in 1702 to 1703, became the quintessential moral and ethical tale of the samurai age, enshrining the principle of unwavering loyalty, chuji, above all other concerns, even law and life itself. The story involves 47 samurai who became masterless, or ronin, after their daimyo, Asano Naganori, was forced to commit seppuku for assaulting a court official. The ronin waited patiently for over a year to avoid detection, before successfully carrying out their meticulous plan to avenge their lord's honor by killing the official responsible. Despite their heroic act of loyalty, the ronin were forced to commit seppuku by the shogunate for breaking the law, a decision that highlighted the fundamental tension between personal Bushido ethics, loyalty, and vengeance, and the Tokugawa legal structure, maintaining the peace. The incident became a powerful, defining narrative, eternally celebrated in kabuki, ukiyo-e, and literature, confirming the samurai's willingness to sacrifice their lives for the purity of their honor and duty. The samurai, the horo, and the protection of couriers. A unique and visually striking element of samurai military dress, particularly in the mid to late feudal period, was the horo, a large balloon-like cloak or mantle worn over the armor and attached to the back of the samurai. The horo was constructed of silk or light fabric stretched over a framework of bamboo or wicker. Its primary function was protective and communicative. When worn by mounted warriors, the horo would inflate with air, serving as a highly visible marker for high-ranking officers, or, most critically, couriers carrying vital dispatches. Furthermore, the rigidity of the inflated horo offered a surprising degree of protection against incoming arrows by causing them to glance off the curved surface rather than penetrating the warrior's back. This specialized garment thus underscored the highly formalized nature of battlefield command, ensuring that vital messages were delivered with speed and that the warrior carrying them, whose role was often critical to the entire battle's outcome, was given an extra layer of highly visible yet effective non-metallic defense. The samurai, the tsuba, sword guard, and its symbolic art. The tsuba, sword guard, of the katana was far more than a simple metal disc protecting the hand from the opponent's blade. It was a highly complex, often exquisitely crafted piece of functional art that served as a canvas for samurai aesthetics, spiritual beliefs, and personal status. Made from iron, copper, or various alloys, the tsuba was the central piece of the sword's fittings, koshiraye, and featured elaborate openwork and intricate carvings depicting mythological creatures, dragons, phoenixes, Shinto or Buddhist deities, or scenes from nature, flora, fauna. The design often served a dual purpose: to express the warrior's patronage of art and to provide spiritual protection or attract good fortune in battle. The style and quality of the tsuba could indicate the samurai's wealth, his school of swordsmanship, or the region he served.
Thus, the tsuba was an intimate, highly visible expression of the samurai's identity, demonstrating that the pursuit of aesthetic perfection and symbolic meaning was intertwined with the lethal function of the weapon. The samurai, justice, law, and the right to kirisute gomen. During the Edo period, the samurai's status as the ruling military and administrative class was legally underscored by the controversial right of kirisute gomen, literally cut and be forgiven, which granted a samurai the legal authority to strike down a commoner who had insulted him, provided the act could be justified later under the law. This right was meant to be a powerful, severe defense of the samurai's honor, meiyo, and legal status, ensuring that no commoner would dare disrespect the ruling class. However, the use of kirisute gomen was subject to strict legal scrutiny. The samurai had to prove the insult was egregious, and the action had to be executed on the spot, usually requiring witnesses and a formal inquest. While it often served as a brutal symbol of samurai legal impunity, the social and judicial restraints on its actual use ensured it was less a frequent occurrence and more a potent legal deterrent that reinforced the absolute separation and hierarchy between the privileged warrior class and the rest of society.
The samurai, the Sankin Kotai system, and feudal control. The Sankin Kotai system, alternate attendance, established and strictly enforced by the Tokugawa shogunate during the Edo period, was arguably the single most effective administrative policy used to ensure the loyalty of the regional daimyo and maintain the shogunate's centralized control. The policy mandated that every daimyo had to spend alternate years residing in the shogun's capital, Edo, modern Tokyo, and leave his primary wife and heir permanently in Edo as hostages when he returned to his domain. This system placed an enormous financial and logistical burden on the daimyo, as they were required to maintain large, extravagant processions and 2 separate residences, effectively draining their wealth and limiting their ability to finance rebellion. By constantly moving the feudal lords and keeping their families under surveillance, the Sankin Kotai successfully achieved 250 years of domestic peace, transforming the warrior daimyo into heavily indebted, manageable administrators and confirming the shogunate's political mastery over the samurai class. The samurai, the legacy of Bushido in modern Japan. The samurai class was legally abolished in the 19th century, yet the ideals and philosophy of Bushido, the way of the warrior, were successfully co-opted and adapted to become a central, enduring pillar of modern Japanese national identity, profoundly influencing military ethics, business culture, and education. During the Meiji period and the subsequent decades, the state promoted a modernized, often revised interpretation of Bushido, emphasizing unquestioning loyalty to the emperor, discipline, self-sacrifice, and stoicism to support the rapid militarization and nation-building efforts. Even in the post-war era, the principles of meticulous effort, group harmony, respect for seniors, and personal integrity, all rooted in samurai ethics, remain influential in the Japanese workplace and education system. The historical memory of the samurai therefore survives not merely as a romanticized historical costume, but as a living moral framework that continues to define the national character and provide ethical guidance in the contemporary world. The samurai, fishing, and the role of coastal domains. While land control and rice agriculture were the primary sources of feudal wealth, the samurai, whose domains were located along the extensive coastlines of Japan, also governed and relied upon maritime resources, particularly fishing, which provided essential protein and formed a critical component of local economies. Coastal samurai clans developed specialized knowledge in naval architecture and seafaring,
often leading to the rise of localized pirate groups, wako, during the volatile Sengoku period, some of whom were subsequently suppressed or absorbed as naval forces by the major daimyo. The control of coastal fishing rights and the taxation of seafood produce were major administrative duties for these maritime samurai, underscoring that the samurai's economic and military jurisdiction extended beyond the fields and castles to the ocean and the crucial seaways connecting the islands. This involvement with the sea emphasized the diverse geographic and logistical requirements of maintaining power in archipelago Japan.
The samurai, the concept of mujo, impermanence, and tragic heroes. The pervasive Buddhist concept of mujo, impermanence, was a central philosophical theme that shaped the samurai worldview and became the defining characteristic of their literary tradition, particularly in the great war tales. Mujo teaches that all things are transient, fleeting, and subject to change, a lesson made brutally real by the constant warfare and swift reversals of fortune that characterized the feudal era. The tragic heroism of figures like Minamoto no Yoshitsune or the Tairakan in the Heiki Monogatari embodies this concept. Their rise to glorious power is inevitably followed by a sudden, devastating fall, reminding the samurai that wealth, status, and even life itself are temporary illusions. This acceptance of mujo was not passive fatalism, but a source of strength, encouraging the warrior to live intensely in the present moment and to value reputation, meiyo, over material existence, as honor was the only thing that could potentially endure the relentless cycle of change. The samurai, the practice of genpuku, coming of age. The transition into the samurai class and the assumption of a warrior's duties were formalized through the ritual of genpuku, coming of age, a ceremony that marked a young male's acceptance into adult society and his formal entry onto the path of the warrior. This solemn ritual, traditionally occurring between the ages of 10 and 15, involved several symbolic acts: the changing of the boy's childhood name to an adult name, nanori, the shaving of the forelock to adopt the adult samurai hairstyle, chonmage, and, most importantly, the donning of the formal samurai attire and the receiving of the daisho, the two swords, from his father or a respected patron. The genpuku was a public declaration of the young man's new responsibilities, which included loyalty to his lord and the willingness to die for honor. It underscored that the samurai status was conferred through ritual and tradition, not merely birth, solidifying the social and legal identity of the new warrior within the hierarchical feudal system. The samurai, the biwa, and the monks of the war tales. Music and storytelling were crucial in maintaining the samurai's cultural memory and ethical ideals, often transmitted through the biwa hoshi, blind itinerant monks who traveled across Japan reciting and chanting the epic war tales, most famously the Tale of the Heiki. The biwa, a short-necked lute, served as the accompaniment. Its often somber, rhythmic plucking underscored the themes of impermanence, mujo, heroism, and tragedy inherent in the stories. These monks were the primary historians and cultural transmitters of the period, popularizing the heroic narrative of the samurai class to both the warrior elite and the common populace. Their performances ensured that the ideals of Bushido were disseminated not through formal texts, but through powerful, accessible oral and musical tradition, guaranteeing that the collective memory of the great samurai conflicts and their moral lessons remained a potent, unifying force in Japanese society.
The samurai, the isolation period, and the Rangoku scholars. The Tokugawa shogunate's policy of national isolation, sakuku, enforced rigidly from the 17th to the mid-19th century, profoundly affected the samurai class,
both by enforcing peace and by leading to their eventual undoing through technological stagnation. While contact with the outside world was restricted, a small, highly influential group of samurai and scholars in domains like Satsuma and Shoshu pursued Ranguku, Dutch learning, acquiring Western knowledge through the single authorized trading post at Dejima, Nagasaki. These Ranguku samurai secretly studied European medicine, science, and critically, military technology and political philosophy. This clandestine intellectual activity created a dual consciousness within the samurai elite, an outward adherence to shogunate tradition coupled with an internal recognition of Japan's technological inferiority compared to the West. The knowledge gained through Ranguku provided the intellectual and military blueprint used by reformist samurai to ultimately overthrow the shogunate and initiate the Meiji Restoration, paradoxically using Western ideas to dismantle the feudal system. The samurai, the kama, and the unexpected weaponry. While the katana and the yari were the hallmark weapons of the samurai class, they and the shinobi they occasionally employed were proficient in a wide array of less conventional weapons, including farming implements adapted for combat, such as the kama, sickle, and its variant, the kusurigama, sickle with a chain and weighted ball. The kama, a simple agricultural tool, was easily concealed and devastating in the hands of a trained fighter, making it a dangerous close-quarters weapon. The kusurigama added a long metal chain, kusuri, and a heavy iron weight, fundo, allowing the user to disable an opponent's sword arm or weapon with the chain before closing in to strike with the sickle. These weapons highlight the practical and often brutal pragmatism underlying Japanese martial arts, utilizing everyday tools that allowed for surprise and were effective against armored foes. Their mastery by the samurai and related warrior figures demonstrated that martial excellence encompassed a profound understanding of unconventional, situational weaponry beyond the noble blade. The samurai, the buke shohato, and the rules for the warrior houses. The buke shohato, laws for the military houses, were a series of decrees issued by the Tokugawa shogunate, first codified in 1615, that served as the foundational legal framework for governing the daimyo and the entire samurai class during the Edo period. These laws meticulously regulated nearly every aspect of samurai life, from their conduct and attire to their political autonomy. Key mandates included the strict prohibition of engaging in unauthorized repairs or expansion of castles, the requirement for marriages to be approved by the shogunate, and a profound emphasis on frugality, scholarship, and martial practice as a discipline, not for war. The buke shohato transformed the decentralized warlike daimyo into compliant administrators, codifying the peace and ensuring that the samurai class served as the disciplined, loyal agents of the shogun, definitively marking the end of the warring states period and the subordination of individual warrior ambition to the stability of the state.
The samurai, the enduring soul of the nation. The 700-year reign of the samurai class, which began with horseback archery in the fields of Kamakura and ended with bureaucratic duty in the castle towns of Edo, represents one of history's most profound transformations of a warrior caste. They were not merely soldiers. They were the architects of Japan's feudal structure, the administrators who governed its domains, and the philosophical elite who codified its moral order. Their power lay not just in the lethal curve of the katana or the impenetrable layering of their yoroi, armor, but in the complex dualistic system of Bushido. This code demanded a near impossible balance, the serene, detached focus of Zen Buddhism to face death without fear, mushin,
combined with the rigid, unwavering social obedience giri derived from Confucianism. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 formally stripped them of their swords and status, forcing a choice between modernization and tradition, tragically culminating in the final heroic stand of the Satsuma Rebellion. Yet, in this political defeat, the samurai achieved a remarkable cultural victory. Their ideals, discipline, intellectual refinement, bunburyodo, stoicism, and a deep aesthetic appreciation for transience or wabi-sabi and the sakura did not vanish. Instead, they were distilled and internalized, forming the very ethical bedrock of modern Japan's military ethos, educational system, and corporate culture. The samurai warrior may have faded into history, but their spirit of unwavering commitment and self-sacrifice remains the nation's eternal guiding legend.